Hello, and let's get right to this week's non-dual lectionary for the fourth Sunday of Easter in year C. This week's lesson is a short one, but I think it's rich. John chapter 10, verses 22 to 30. At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, in regard to what he has given me, is greater than all, and no one can snatch them out of the Father's hand. The Father and I are one." So I want to talk about a couple of things here. The first is, I think often we read this and what we get out of here is what we can glean from this is people are asking if you're the Messiah, and he says Jesus is kind of like, oh, obviously I am, right? He's saying yes. He's saying, like, look at everything. Come on, I've already told you, and everything I've done. Like, if you're not believing this factual statement, it's on you at this point. Um, I'd like to undo that a little bit. I don't think that's what's going on here. And I think we've got two things in this. And the first is Jesus as teacher, and the second is sort of Jesus as exemplar of the non-dual recognition. So the first is as the teacher, right? So if you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. And he does not say yes. We can take all this as yes, but he doesn't say yes. He doesn't say, yes, I am. He says, I have told you and you do not believe. But he doesn't say, I told you yes. And belief here, again, is that same Greek word we talked about a bit before, which can mean belief, it can mean trust, it can mean faith. Um, and we often take this as, again, like factual assent to or assent to a particular factual statement. I don't think that's what's going on here. So, he's not saying yes. Take that factual statement as it is. And why not? Because if again, if you accept the proposition that Jesus has this recognition, the no self, the self beyond self, whatever you want to call it there, and he's living from that, and he's manifesting that, and he's teaching that, then saying the factual statement can actually be harmful, right? Because what it does is say, in the context of the Hebrew scriptures too, right? Where there's this idea that there's this Messiah that will come and the Messiah will take care of everything, and that individual person who isn't me, right? That's the end of the thing. And Jesus is in that context, but sees it differently, understands it differently because, and we'll get to that second part actually. So we won't do the because yet. But what he's doing then is saying, this isn't about me making a factual statement, you agreeing or not. This is about everything else. And then we'll turn to that. And I think we can see that today too, right? Because Christianity, despite a lot of things that Jesus said, has become primarily something about, well, primarily is too strong. To a lot of people, has become the point is, do you believe in this factually or not? Right? If you do, you're saved, you're going to heaven. If you don't, you're not. Um, Maybe there's some faith in there. I mean, maybe there's some, you need to live in a particular way according to that, maybe not. But look at the people who profess to assent to that factual statement. And you've got everything and its opposite under that umbrella, right? You've got people who think you should act this way to be more moral and the exact opposite to be moral. And you think you've got people who say you need to um, you live your life this way and you need to live your life in exactly the opposite way. And even on this sort of, what's the point of the underlying teaching? And, if you want to go into something deeper, right? There are people who say, well, Jesus requires that of us, or not requires it, but leads us there, right? That this is about, or is exemplifying for us, a spiritual path. And then there are people that don't. So the belief thing is more or less meaningless. I mean, by whatever measure you want to say, um, by moral measure, by social measure, by spiritual recognition or awakening experience measure, whether you believe or not, seems to have no effect. Seems to be essentially meaningless. And so Jesus, I think, as a good um, spiritual teacher, recognizes that. And so instead of answering plainly, so that people can set up a religion around the fact that he's a Messiah and believe in that and go on with their lives as if nothing has changed, um, does this other thing. And that's the other thing. That's the second thing I want to talk about. So starting from the end, right? The Father and I are one. And of course, in the traditional view, what that gets taken is it's the person of Jesus and God are one. And I don't think that's what that is. Why? Because again, like this goes all the way back to the first video I posted, the introduction to this, right? Alan Watts points out, if you're in a Hindu context, a Buddhist context, and somebody says, "Oh, well, God and I are one," you don't get this like, "Oh, well, you're claiming to be the Messiah," and you get the, "Oh, good, you figured that out too." And that's a little trite, a little glib. It's a little more complicated than that. But the idea being the person of Jesus, this isn't a statement being said by the ego or by a small self named Jesus, right? A personality who has concluded that, you know, has been told and believes it himself, right? That he and God are the same person. It's from that non-dual recognition that whatever God or Father means in this context, right? Whatever word that means, because it's all, mm, I mean, there's that unitive experience and non-dual, and this is where non-dual can be really helpful, right? It's stated as a negative, but it's nothing outside, right? Like without an opposite. Uh, so that my true self, my deepest self, the one that is expressing this is the same as what you would call Father or God. There's no difference. There's no separation there. Neither is there separation from anything else. And at the same time, there is separation. It's not about, but that's the recognition, right? This is as clear way as you can state it as anything. So then, filtering back through the rest of it, right? My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me, but you don't believe because you don't belong to my sheep, right? Same kind of statement here, right? If you've got that recognition, if you can see it yourself, you're in the fold, not in the fold of in group, out group, right? But you're going to hear this. I know them, they follow me. Again, being expressed, I think this is being expressed not as someone, not as a personality named Jesus, but as an expression of that deep recognition. Trying to answer this question in a way that is helpful to the listener, right? So the works that I do show what's going on here, right? But you're not hearing, you're not getting it. And I'll give eternal life and they won't perish, right? But that also should disrupt the personality, the hearer, if it's an ego self and go, but that doesn't make any sense, right? And yeah, we can set up this project of, oh, it really is about living forever. But instead, no. It's pointing to something that is eternal, right? That's never perishing, without beginning, without end. And again, that's part of that recognition if you've had that experience. And no one can snatch them out, right? That's just pure non-dual language, right? No one can snatch them out because where would they go? Right? What is something that cannot be snatched out of something else? And the way our small minds can think of that is only like a holding that can never let go, right? A certainty. But the other option is not a certainty in a thing, in a changing world of which there can be no ultimate certainty, right? But that if we're not talking about the changing world, if not talking about impermanence, if there's the permanence that is in the impermanence, then that is the non-dual thing itself, right? Then that's what can never be snatched out because there's nowhere else to go. So there, whew, I got fired up, right? I think this again, I think what we've got here is, Jesus being asked as a teacher and then speaking from that recognition and not answering the question directly because, right, he recognizes the listener can't hear it directly, as any good teacher does, right? And then points in these different ways in the context of the Hebrew scriptures, in the context of the culture in which he's in, at all these statements that say both I, the person you see, because that's where it ultimately ends up too, right? Although the personality isn't the one who has the recognition, it then speaks back through the personality. The personality also isn't separate from everything, right? So the Father and I are one is first a recognition that I am not who I seem, but then who I seem is also enfolded in that as well. And all these statements, right? The Father's sheep can never be let go, and if you're in the sheep, if you're in the fold there, you can hear my voice. All of that being this, again, like just these pointers of, hey, can you listen from there, right? Can you live from there? Can you embody that recognition of fundamentally, as always, just what is always and forever, but before there's a forever, what always is right now.